The sound that echoed through the crystal ballroom wasn't a champagne cork popping or the swell of the string quartet. It was the violent tear of silk, a sound that sliced through the murmurs of the city's elite and left a vacuum of shocked silence in its wake. All eyes fell on Audrey Markham, standing exposed and vulnerable on the marble floor, the beautiful gown she'd spent weeks designing now hanging in tatters from her body. Her husband Jovan stood before her, his face a mask of cold fury. But the true horror wasn't the dress. It was his next command, delivered for all to hear, as his mistress watched with a triumphant smile. "Kneel. Apologize to her. Now." The Markham penthouse on Park Avenue was less a home and more a museum of a life Audrey Jensen felt she was merely curating. Sunlight, scrubbed clean by the altitude, streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, glinting off chrome glass and the cold, abstract sculptures her husband, Jovan Markham, collected. Each piece was an investment, a statement. Much like Audrey herself. She traced the seam of a velvet cushion on a couch. No one ever sat on the fabric, a deep, unforgiving black. From this height, New York was a silent, sprawling masterpiece. But inside, the silence was different. It was heavy-laden with unspoken things. Their 5 years of marriage had started with a whirlwind of what she'd mistaken for passion, a dizzying ascent into a world of unimaginable wealth and influence. Jovan, a ruthless titan in private equity, had swept her off her feet. She, a scholarship art student with a portfolio full of promising fashion sketches and a heart full of hope, had believed in their story. Now that story felt like a fiction she was forced to perform daily. The passion had cooled into possession, the affection into a chilling form of control. "Is that what you're wearing to the planning brunch?" Jovan's voice, smooth as polished granite, cut through her thoughts. He emerged from his dressing room, already immaculate in a tailored suit that probably cost more than her father's car. He adjusted his platinum cufflinks, his eyes scanning her simple cream-colored day dress with faint disapproval. "It's just brunch with the gala committee, Jovan," Audrey replied, her voice soft. "It's appropriate." "Appropriate is the bare minimum, Audrey." "We don't do the minimum," he said, not unkindly, but with the finality of a CEO issuing a directive. "The Beaumont Gala is not just another charity event. Conrad Beaumont himself will be there. Every deal, every alliance for the next fiscal year will have its roots in that ballroom. Our presentation matters." Our presentation. He meant his presentation, and she was the most critical accessory. Conrad Beaumont was the old money kingmaker of their world, a man whose quiet nod could build empires or shatter them. Jovan had been courting his approval for years, and this gala, hosted by Beaumont's own foundation, was Jovan's grand stage. "I understand," she said, the two words a well-worn shield. "Good. Because Bianca Holloway will be at the brunch. You know her family practically built the West Wing of the Met. Her standards are high." He said the name casually, but a cold knot tightened in Audrey's stomach. Bianca Holloway. A woman as sleek and dangerous as a panther, with a pedigree as old as the city itself. For the last year, her name had been a ghost haunting their penthouse, a whisper in gossip columns, a lingering scent of expensive, unfamiliar perfume on Jovan's suits. Audrey had no concrete proof of an affair, only 1,000 tiny cuts of intuition and a growing coldness in her husband's bed. Later that day, at a restaurant where the water glasses were made of hand-blown crystal, Audrey sat beside Bianca. The committee meeting was a flurry of talk about floral arrangements and auction items. Bianca, in a blood-red dress that clung to her like a second skin, directed the conversation with effortless authority, occasionally throwing a pitying smile Audrey's way. "Audrey, darling," Bianca purred, placing a manicured hand on her arm. "You're so quiet. Don't you have any thoughts on the centerpiece designs? Or is this all a bit much for you?" The condescension was subtle, a poison dart wrapped in velvet. Before Audrey could answer, Jovan, seated opposite, laughed. "My Audrey is more of an artist than a planner. She lives in her own little world of sketches and dreams. Leave the logistics to us, Bianca." He framed it as a compliment, but it was a dismissal. He was telling the table and her that she was irrelevant. Audrey felt her cheeks flush. Her little world of sketches was the only part of her that still felt real. In a locked portfolio in her studio, the one room in the penthouse Jovan never entered, were designs born from years of passion. Gowns, dresses, suits, a whole collection that lived and breathed on paper, a secret rebellion against the sterile world she inhabited. As the brunch concluded, Audrey overheard Bianca speaking to Jovan in a hushed tone near the exit. "She looks drained, G. You need someone with stamina. Someone who shines on your arm. This is the big leagues." Audrey didn't hear Jovan's reply. She didn't need to. She saw the way he smiled at Bianca, a warm, genuine smile she hadn't seen directed at her in years. The knot in her stomach turned to ice. This wasn't just about a potential deal with Conrad Beaumont. This gala was a battlefield, and she was about to be a casualty. That night alone in her studio, she pulled out her portfolio. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened it to a fresh page. For weeks, she had been secretly working on a special project, her own gown for the Beaumont Gala. It was a midnight blue silk, a cascade of fabric designed to move like liquid moonlight. The neckline was a daring, elegant sweep, and the back was a delicate lattice of hand-stitched beadwork. It was everything she was not allowed to be: bold, beautiful, and unapologetically her own. She picked up a charcoal pencil. As the city slept below, Audrey Jensen began to sketch her armor. If she was going to walk into a battle, she would do it on her own terms, wearing a creation that was a testament not to Jovan's wealth, but to the spirit he was trying so hard to crush. The weeks leading up to the Beaumont Gala were a masterclass in psychological warfare. Jovan's obsession with the event intensified, and his control over Audrey's life tightened like a vice. He vetted her schedule, critiqued her conversations, and insisted on joint sessions with a high-profile stylist. He'd hired a severe woman named Colette, who looked at Audrey's ideas with disdain. "Mrs. Markham, your personal taste is quaint," Colette said during one session, flipping through a book of approved couture gowns. "But Mr. Markham wants a statement. He wants to project power. We're thinking something from the new Valentino collection. Something classic, reserved. Gold, perhaps. It communicates old money." "I was thinking of wearing one of my own designs," Audrey said, her voice barely above a whisper. Yet the statement felt like a cannon blast in the quiet room. Jovan, who had been scrolling through his phone, looked up, his brow furrowed in annoyance. "Absolutely not. Audrey, this is not a student art show. This is the Beaumont Gala. You will wear what Colette and I decide." "It's just that I've been working on something that dropped," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. He turned to Colette. "Bill the gold Valentino to my account, the one we saw last week." The dismissal stung more than any raised voice. It was a complete erasure of her identity. Her one act of defiance, Her one chance to feel like herself was forbidden. Yet she didn't stop. Every night after Jovan was asleep or out for one of his late meetings, Audrey would slip into her studio. The midnight blue dress was taking shape, no longer just a sketch. She'd sourced the silk from a small independent supplier in Italy, paying for it with the remnants of a small inheritance from her grandmother, the only money that was truly hers. Stitching the delicate beads onto the back felt like an act of meditation, each tiny crystal a prayer for strength. The dress was becoming more than fabric. It was a vessel for her silent scream. The unraveling began with a simple, careless mistake. A week before the gala, Jovan left his personal tablet on the kitchen island. He was usually meticulous about his devices, but a call had come in from his London office and he'd rushed out barking orders into his phone. Audrey was cleaning up when the screen lit up with a notification. It was a calendar reminder from Bianca Holloway. Subject: Final Touches. Location: the Carlisle Suite, 1201. Note: don't forget the Cartier. Can't wait to finalize our big night. G. The blood drained from Audrey's face. The Carlisle was a hotel known for its discretion, a place for quiet, expensive affairs. Our big night. The words twisted in her gut. She knew with a certainty that was cold and absolute that they weren't talking about floral arrangements. Her hand hovered over the tablet, her heart hammering against her ribs. She had never invaded his privacy before. It was an unspoken rule in their cold truce of a marriage. But something had already broken inside her. The constant belittling, the dismissal of her dreams, Bianca's smug superiority, it all coalesced into a single desperate need for the truth. With trembling fingers, she unlocked the tablet. Jovan, in his arrogance, used a simple passcode, the date their first major joint asset cleared escrow. It didn't take long to find. A folder labeled Private, hidden within a decoy Quarterly Reports folder. Inside were not spreadsheets, but photos. Dozens of them. Jovan and Bianca on a yacht in Monaco, his arm possessively around her bare waist. Bianca in a lavish hotel room, wearing a diamond necklace Audrey recognized one Jovan had claimed was a corporate gift for a client's wife. Bianca draped in a silk robe, raising a champagne glass in what was unmistakably their Hamptons beach house. The images were a brutal confirmation of everything she had suspected and feared. It wasn't just an affair. It was a parallel life, a life he was building with another woman, furnished with their money in their homes. He wasn't just cheating on her. He was replacing her piece by piece. The final crushing blow was a series of emails between Jovan and his lawyer. They were discussing divorce settlements. Jovan's primary objective was to activate a ruthless prenuptial clause that would leave Audrey with next to nothing, citing her lack of contribution to the marital estate. He was planning to discard her after the Beaumont Gala, once he had secured his deal with Conrad. The gala was her final performance as Mrs. Markham. Audrey sank to the floor, the cold marble seeping into her bones. The air was thin, hard to breathe. The pictures, the emails, Bianca's message. It was an avalanche of betrayal. She wasn't just a wife. She was a business strategy, an asset with a rapidly approaching expiration date. For a long moment, she felt nothing but a vast, hollow emptiness. The tears wouldn't come. The anger felt too distant. But then, as her eyes drifted from the damning evidence on the screen to the closed door of her studio, a new feeling began to smolder in the void. It wasn't despair. It was resolve. Jovan and Bianca were planning their big night. They thought she was a pawn in their game, a doll to be dressed up and then discarded. They had no idea who she was. They had no idea what she was capable of. She stood up, her movements calm and deliberate. She walked back to her studio and looked at the nearly finished gown. The midnight blue silk seemed to absorb the dim light, radiating a quiet power. Her armor. The Valentino would remain in its box. She would go to the Beaumont Gala, and she would shine. Not for Jovan, not as Mrs. Markham, the disposable accessory, but as Audrey Jensen, the designer. It would not be her final performance. It would be her debut. And she would make sure it was a night no one, especially Jovan and Bianca, would ever forget. The grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel was transformed into a celestial wonderland for the Beaumont Foundation Gala. Thousands of shimmering fairy lights were strung from the ceiling, mimicking a star-filled sky, and the scent of white orchids and expensive perfume hung in the air. The city's most powerful figures drifted through the room in a river of couture and diamonds, their laughter and conversation a low, continuous hum, the sound of money and influence at play. Audrey arrived on Jovan's arm, a purely functional connection. He hadn't even looked at her as they left the penthouse. He was too busy taking a call, his voice sharp with anticipation. But the moment they stepped out of the Rolls-Royce and into the flash of cameras, his mask of the doting husband snapped into place. His hand rested on the small of her back, a proprietary gesture that felt more like a brand than a caress. He hadn't noticed the dress. Not really. In the dim lighting of the car, he'd only registered that it wasn't the gold Valentino. "Is that blue?" he'd asked, distracted. "Fine. It's dark, it's conservative enough. Just stay close to me. And smile." But it wasn't just a blue dress. It was her dress. The midnight silk flowed around her, the fabric whispering against her skin with every step. The cut was masterful, hinting at her form, without clinging a picture of grace and quiet confidence. The beaded lattice on her back caught the light like a constellation, drawing subtle, appreciative glances. For the first time in years, she felt visible. She felt like herself. Whispers followed them as they entered the ballroom. "That's Jovan Markham. He's about to close the Beaumont infrastructure deal." "Who is his wife? I've never really seen her before." "The dress is stunning. Is it a custom Dior?" Jovan, soaking in the attention, navigated them towards the room's gravitational center, a small circle of people around an older man, with a shock of silver hair and eyes that held a calm, knowing intelligence. Conrad Beaumont. "Conrad!" Jovan boomed his voice, radiating a practiced warmth. "You've outdone yourself. A spectacular evening." Conrad Beaumont turned his gaze, sweeping over Jovan, before landing on Audrey. He held it for a fraction of a second longer than expected, a flicker of genuine appreciation in his eyes. "Jovan, good to see you. And this must be your lovely wife." "Audrey, this is Mr. Conrad Beaumont," Jovan said, his grip tightening on her back. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mr. Beaumont," Audrey said, her voice clear and steady. "Your foundation does incredible work. Please call me Conrad. The pleasure is all mine, Audrey," he replied, his smile gentle. "That is an absolutely magnificent gown. I don't believe I recognize the designer." Before Audrey could answer, Jovan cut in with a hearty laugh. "Oh, this old thing, my wife, has a little hobby. Let's not bore Mr. Beaumont with the details." "Conrad, did you see the latest projections on the Asian market?" Jovan steered the conversation effectively, pushing Audrey to the periphery once more. But she had seen the look in Conrad's eyes. He wasn't dismissing her. He was curious. For a moment, she felt a spark of connection, a recognition from a world she thought she'd lost forever. The evening wore on. Jovan worked the room like a shark, introducing Audrey with diminishing enthusiasm as the night progressed. My wife Audrey soon became a mere nod in her direction. She was a prop, and her purpose had been served. Then Bianca Holloway made her entrance. She was a vision in crimson, a stark, fiery contrast to the cool, celestial theme of the gala. The dress was audacious, cut low, and slit high, designed for one purpose: to command attention. And it did. The river of conversation parted for her as she moved directly toward their group. "Jovan, darling," she exclaimed, air-kissing him, with a familiarity that was a slap in Audrey's face. She ignored Audrey completely, her eyes locked on Jovan. "You look powerful tonight. And you look like you own the place, Bianca," Jovan replied, his voice thick with an admiration he never showed his wife. The two of them, fire and ice, stood side by side, a perfectly matched power couple. To anyone watching, Audrey, in her quiet, elegant blue, was the one who seemed out of place. The whispers in the room shifted their tone, turning from curious to conspiratorial. The affair, it seemed, was the worst-kept secret in Manhattan. Bianca finally turned her attention to Audrey, her gaze raking over the blue dress with a slow, deliberate insolence. "Oh, Audrey, you're here. That's a sweet dress. Did you make it yourself?" The word sweet was an insult, a condescending pat on the head. The public humiliation was a cold wave washing over Audrey. Jovan did nothing. He just stood there, smiling, basking in the reflected glow of Bianca's audacity. He was proud of her. Proud of this woman who was openly disrespecting his wife. Audrey squared her shoulders, the silk of her dress a second skin of courage. "I did actually," she said, her voice surprisingly firm. "I'm glad you like it." Bianca's smile faltered for a second, surprised by the lack of a flustered reaction. But she recovered quickly. "How domestic. Jovan, you must be so proud. Now, if you'll excuse us, Conrad Beaumont is waving me over. He wants to discuss my family's new endowment. Some of us are here to do real business." With a final triumphant smirk, she looped her arm through Jovan's and began to pull him away. "Come on, G. Let's not get stuck in the shallow end." Jovan went with her, leaving Audrey standing alone in the center of the swirling gala, the whispers now feeling like blows. He had abandoned her publicly for his mistress. The pain was sharp, a physical ache in her chest. But beneath the pain, the embers of her resolve glowed hotter. This was not the end of her night. She refused to let it be. Taking a deep, steadying breath, she held her head high and walked toward the terrace away from the prying eyes to gather her strength for the battle that was yet to come. The cool night air of the terrace was a welcome shock to Audrey's senses. She leaned against the stone balustrade, looking out over the glittering expanse of Central Park. The sounds of the gala were muffled out here, the whispers replaced by the distant symphony of the city. For a few precious moments, she allowed herself to just breathe, to let the sharp edges of the humiliation soften. She was so lost in thought that she didn't hear the footsteps behind her until a familiar, kind voice spoke. "A bit overwhelming in there, isn't it?" Audrey turned to see Conrad Beaumont standing a few feet away, holding 2 glasses of champagne. He offered one to her with a small, understanding smile. "I find that after an hour, the collective ego in that room can suck all the oxygen out of the air." Audrey accepted the glass, her hand trembling slightly. Thank you, Mr. Beaumont. Conrad, please, he insisted gently. Your husband was inelegant back there, and for what it's worth, I meant what I said. Your gown is a work of art. The draping is exceptional. It reminds me of the early work of Madame Gray. You have a remarkable talent. The compliment, so specific and knowledgeable, landed like a balm on her wounded spirit. He saw the work, the skill, not just the sweet little hobby. Thank you, she said, her voice thick with emotion. That means more than you know. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, sipping their champagne. Jovan is a very ambitious man, Conrad said, his tone thoughtful. Ambition can be a powerful engine, but if it's not steered by integrity, it tends to drive a man right off a cliff. He looked at her, his eyes full of a sympathy that wasn't pity. You seem to have a great deal of integrity, Audrey. Their conversation was interrupted by the sharp, angry sound of the terrace doors sliding open. Jovan stood there, his face a thunderous mask. Bianca was at his side, her expression a mixture of irritation and smug satisfaction. There you are. Jovan snapped his eyes, flicking from Audrey to Conrad, a flicker of panic in their depths. I've been looking for you. We need to present a united front. You wandering off to corner Mr. Beaumont is not part of the plan. Conrad raised a placid eyebrow. There was no cornering Jovan. Your wife and I were enjoying a civilized conversation, a rare commodity tonight, it seems. The calm authority in Conrad's voice only seemed to fuel Jovan's rage. He saw the scene through the lens of his own paranoia. His wife, the woman he planned to discard, was somehow charming, the one man he needed to impress. It was an act of betrayal. Audrey, we're leaving, Jovan commanded, grabbing her arm. His fingers dug into her flesh. Jovan, you're hurting me, she whispered, trying to pull away. Don't make a scene. He hissed, his voice low and venomous. Bianca stepped forward, a cruel smile playing on her lips. Listen to your husband, Audrey. You've had your little moment in the spotlight. It's over. You embarrassed him enough for one night by wearing that tablecloth. The insult, so petty and vicious, was the final straw. All the pain, the betrayal, the years of being diminished, coalesced into a single point of pure, cold anger. Audrey looked directly at Bianca. The only person embarrassing Jovan tonight, she said, her voice ringing with newfound strength, is you. Bianca gasped, her face contorting in disbelief. Jovan's eyes widened, then narrowed into slits of pure fury. No one had ever seen Audrey speak with such defiance. In his mind, his possession was malfunctioning. What did you just say to her? He snarled. You heard me, Audrey said, standing her ground. It happened in an instant. The rage in Jovan, simmering all night, boiled over. It was a primal, ugly thing. With a guttural roar of frustration, he reached out with both hands, grabbed the elegant neckline of her dress, and tore it. The sound was shockingly loud in the relative quiet of the terrace. The exquisite midnight blue silk, the product of weeks of her love and labor, ripped from her shoulder down to her waist. The delicate beaded latticework on the back snapped, scattering tiny crystals across the stone floor, like fallen stars. The dress hung from her in pathetic shreds, exposing the simple slip she wore underneath. A collective gasp came from the few people who had wandered onto the terrace and witnessed the act. The world seemed to slow down. Audrey stood there, shock rendering her immobile, the cool night air hitting her exposed skin. She felt naked, violated, utterly broken. Conrad Beaumont took a half-step forward, his face a mask of cold, controlled fury. Jovan, that is enough. But Jovan was lost in his own red mist of rage. He wasn't looking at Conrad. He was looking at Bianca, whose initial shock had morphed into a look of pure malicious triumph. He had defended her honor. He had put Audrey back in her place. He turned back to Audrey, his voice dropping to a chilling authoritative command meant for everyone to hear. He pointed a finger at Bianca. "She is worth 1,000 of you," he seethed. "You will apologize to her. Now." Audrey stared at him, her mind reeling. He hadn't just destroyed her dress, her art. He was trying to destroy her very soul. "Kneel," he commanded, his voice raw with power. "Kneel before her and apologize for disrespecting her." The demand was monstrous. It was a public execution of her dignity. Bianca watched her arms crossed, a sickening smile of victory on her face. This was it, the final humiliation, the moment that would shatter Audrey, completely leaving her as nothing more than a broken piece of his past. The small audience on the terrace held its breath, trapped in the horrifying tableau. Audrey's world had been torn apart, and now she was being ordered to kneel in the ruins. The silence on the terrace was absolute, broken only by the distant, oblivious hum of city traffic. Jovan's order hung in the air, a grotesque monument to his cruelty. Kneel, it was a word designed to break her, to force her into a posture of utter submission before his mistress, before the world. Bianca's smile widened, her eyes glittering with anticipation. She was waiting for the final satisfying snap of Audrey's spirit. Audrey's gaze was locked on Jovan. In his eyes, she saw not just rage, but a desperate, pathetic need for dominance. He needed to see her broken to feel powerful. He needed to humiliate her to validate his choice of Bianca. And in that moment, seeing his weakness so clearly, the last vestiges of her fear burned away, leaving behind something hard and unyielding. She would not kneel. She would rather be torn apart herself than give him that satisfaction. She straightened her spine, what was left of her ruined gown, fluttering around her like a tattered flag. She met his furious glare, and in a voice that was quiet, but resonated with the strength of forged steel, she said, "No." The word, so simple, so final, struck Jovan like a physical blow. He stared at her dumbfounded. He had expected tears, pleading collapse. He had not expected defiance. "What did you say?" he hissed, taking a menacing step closer. "I said no." Audrey repeated, her voice stronger now. "I will not kneel. Not for you. Not for her. Not for anyone." Bianca's triumphant smile faltered, replaced by a sneer of annoyance. "Don't be a fool, Audrey. Just do what he says and end this." "This ended a long time ago," Audrey said, her eyes never leaving Jovan's. "I just didn't realize it until now." Jovan raised his hand, his face contorted with a rage so profound it was almost animalistic. He was about to escalate to perhaps strike her to force her to the ground. The onlookers gasped, frozen in horror. But before his hand could move another inch, a calm, authoritative voice sliced through the tension. "That's quite enough, Markham." Conrad Beaumont stepped between them. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't rush. He moved with a quiet, deliberate authority that instantly commanded the space. He faced Jovan, his expression one of glacial disappointment. He was no longer the affable host. He was the kingmaker, the man whose judgment could end careers with a single, quiet word. "You are a guest at an event for my foundation," Conrad said, his voice dangerously low. "An event meant to support victims of abuse and hardship. And you choose this venue to perpetrate this disgusting display. You are a disgrace." Jovan's rage faltered, replaced by a sudden dawning panic. He had forgotten Conrad was there. He had lost control in front of the one man he couldn't afford to offend. "Conrad, you don't understand. She was—" "I understand perfectly." Conrad cut him off, his gaze like chips of ice. "I understand what I saw." He turned his back on Jovan, a gesture more damning than any insult, and faced Audrey. With a movement of profound gentility, he slipped off his own exquisitely tailored tuxedo jacket. "Audrey," he said, his voice now soft with compassion. "Allow me." He gently draped the jacket over her shoulders. The fine wool was warm against her cold skin, a shield against the prying eyes and the biting shame. It was an act of profound kindness, a public and undeniable alignment. In that single gesture, he chose her. He offered her his arm. "I believe you have had more than enough of this circus. Allow me to escort you out. My personal driver is waiting downstairs." Audrey looked at Jovan, who stood frozen, his face pale with shock and fury. She looked at Bianca, whose triumphant expression had curdled into one of disbelief and hatred. And then she looked at Conrad, at the unwavering kindness in his eyes. Without a word, she slipped her arm through his. As they walked away, leaving Jovan and Bianca standing amidst the scattered beads and the ruin of their own making, Conrad leaned in slightly. "What you did back there," he murmured for her ears only, "took a kind of courage I have not seen in a very long time. Don't ever let anyone, especially a small man like that, convince you that you are anything less than remarkable." He led her not through the ballroom, but through a private corridor, shielding her from any further stairs. As they waited for the elevator, he turned to her. "When you are ready," he said, handing her a simple, elegant business card, "I would like to talk to you about your designs, not as a hobby, as a business. The Beaumont Foundation has a new initiative, a grant and mentorship program for uniquely talented female entrepreneurs. I believe you would be its perfect inaugural candidate." The elevator doors opened. As Audrey stepped inside, wrapped in his jacket, holding a card that represented an impossible future, she felt the last shattered pieces of her old life fall away. She wasn't fleeing a battlefield in defeat. She was being led from the wreckage toward a new horizon by a hand she had never expected. The tearing of her dress had not been an end. It was a violent, painful, and ultimately liberating beginning. The 3 months that followed the Beaumont Gala were a blur of dismantling and rebuilding. The day after the gala, Audrey, with the quiet assistance of Conrad's legal team, filed for divorce. Jovan, blindsided and publicly disgraced, fought back with the ferocity of a cornered animal. His lawyers descended, brandishing the brutal prenuptial agreement like a weapon. They painted Audrey as an unstable gold-digging opportunist. But they hadn't counted on Conrad Beaumont. The whispers from the gala had solidified into a damning narrative. Key investors who had witnessed the event or heard credible accounts of it began to distance themselves from Jovan. Conrad made a few quiet calls, and suddenly the financing for the infrastructure deal Jovan had been banking his entire year on was under review. The world that had once seemed so solid beneath Jovan's feet was rapidly turning to quicksand. His reputation, the currency he valued above all else, was in freefall. Meanwhile, Audrey was building. She moved out of the sterile Park Avenue penthouse and into a bright, airy loft in Chelsea that served as both her home and studio. The space, which she paid for with the initial seed money from the Beaumont Foundation's grant, quickly filled with bolts of fabric sketches and mannequins. The creative energy that had been suppressed for so long erupted. She worked with a feverish, joyful intensity, pouring all her pain resilience and hope into her designs. Conrad was more than a benefactor. He was a mentor. He met with her weekly, not to direct her creative vision, but to teach her the language of business. He connected her with supply chain experts, patent lawyers, and marketing gurus. He treated her not as a victim he had rescued, but as a brilliant artist and a savvy businesswoman in the making. "Your greatest asset, Audrey," he told her during one of their meetings, "is your story. People don't just buy a dress, they buy the vision behind it. Your vision is one of strength, of turning ugliness into beauty. That is a powerful brand." He encouraged her to formally launch her own label, Jensen. It was her name, her identity reclaimed. Her divorce proceedings were grueling. Jovan's legal team brought up her frivolous spending on fabric, trying to frame her design work as a wasteful hobby. But Audrey, flanked by Conrad's formidable lawyer, a woman named Ms. DeWitt, was no longer the timid woman who flinched at her husband's tone. She presented a meticulously documented business plan, backed by the Beaumont grant. She detailed how she had used her own small inheritance to fund her work. The tide turned when Ms. DeWitt presented sworn affidavits from 3 separate witnesses from the gala, including a well-known society columnist. They described Jovan's verbal abuse, his public humiliation of his wife, and the final violent act of tearing her dress. The narrative of the unstable gold digger collapsed, replaced by the reality of a woman escaping a toxic and abusive marriage. The judge, a no-nonsense older woman, looked at Jovan with open contempt. As Jovan's professional life crumbled, so too did his personal one. Bianca, who had attached herself to his rising star, had no interest in being tethered to a falling one. The thrill of being the other woman was gone, replaced by the social stench of his disgrace. She saw the invitations dry up, felt the chill from her society friends. She had wanted to be the wife of the man who conquered the city, not the mistress of a pariah. Their fights became explosive, and within 2 months she was gone, leaving Jovan alone in the silent, empty penthouse. One crisp autumn afternoon, Audrey was fitting a model in a stunning emerald green coat, the centerpiece of her debut collection. Her sister Sophie, who had flown in to help her prepare, was managing a swarm of emails. "Audrey, you need to see this," Sophie said, holding out a tablet. On the screen was a press release. "Markham Equity Holdings announces CEO Jovan Markham stepping down amid restructuring." The article detailed massive investor pullouts and a catastrophic loss of confidence in his leadership. He had been forced out of his own company. Audrey looked at the headline, at the picture of the man who had tried to destroy her, now professionally destroyed himself. She felt no triumphant glee, no surge of vengeful satisfaction. She felt a quiet, profound sense of release. His fate was no longer tied to hers. His downfall was not her victory. Her victory was the emerald coat, the bustling studio, the life she was building with her own 2 hands. "Good," she said simply, and turned back to the model. "Let's check the drape on this shoulder one more time." A week later, she received an invitation. It was for the Future of Fashion showcase, a prestigious industry event where new designers could present a capsule collection to buyers, investors, and the press. It was a massive opportunity, the kind of break that could launch a career overnight. At the bottom of the invitation was a handwritten note from the event's primary sponsor. "Audrey, the world is waiting to see what you have to say. I have no doubt you will leave them speechless." C.B. Conrad had arranged it. He had not just given her a shield and a lifeline. He had given her a stage, and she was ready to take it. The chosen venue for the Future of Fashion showcase was a cathedral of industrial chic in the heart of the meat-packing district, cavernous and raw. The warehouse retained its ghost of a former life in the aged brick walls and the web of exposed steel beams high overhead. But tonight it was transformed. The raw space was softened by dramatic gallery-style lighting that made the air itself seem to hum with energy. A sleek, polished runway cut through the center of the room, flanked by rows of minimalist chairs already filling with the city's most influential figures. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and the low, excited thrum of conversation, the distinct sound of anticipation from a crowd that expected to be impressed. Backstage was another world, a tightly coiled spring of controlled chaos. Models tall and serene stood like living statues, while dressers made final-minute adjustments. The air buzzed with the whisper of fabrics, the click of cameras, and the clipped professional calls of the stage crew. In the center of it all, Audrey was an unexpected nexus of calm. She moved with a quiet, focused grace, adjusting a collar here, offering a word of encouragement there. This was her element. The doubt and fear that had haunted her for years were gone, replaced by the profound certainty of an artist who knew her work was ready. She was not the fragile accessory to a powerful man. She was the architect of this entire intricate world. In the final moments before the show began, Conrad Beaumont found her in a quiet corner away from the flurry of activity. He held 2 bottles of water, offering one to her. "How is the commander before the battle?" he asked, his eyes twinkling with a paternal warmth that had become a steadying force in her life. "Terrified," Audrey confessed, her voice a low murmur, yet a small, genuine smile touched her lips. "But it's a good kind of terror, I think. It feels alive. For so long I felt like I was holding my breath. Now I can finally breathe." She took a sip of water, her gaze sweeping over the scene she had brought to life. "Thank you, Conrad, for all of this. Whatever happens when those lights go up, I've already won a victory I never thought possible. I created something real from the wreckage." "That you did," Conrad said, his expression shifting from warm encouragement to something more serious, more profound. He drew her a little further from the backstage bustle. "Audrey, there's a final piece of this puzzle you need to see. The largest single asset in Jovan's portfolio. The one he leveraged almost everything to acquire was a controlling interest in a textile technology firm. It's called Innovatex. Their team developed a revolutionary, sustainable fiber, a material that could change the face of eco-friendly fashion." Audrey listened, a knot of confusion forming in her stomach. Why was he telling her this now? "The deal was financed by my primary investment bank," Conrad continued, his voice even. "After the events at the gala, it became clear that Mr. Markham's character represented an unacceptable level of risk. My bank and several others who followed our lead re-evaluated our partnership. We withdrew our backing." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. Innovatex was on the verge of collapse. Jovan's grand acquisition was about to become his biggest liability. "So he lost it," Audrey whispered, trying to grasp the scale of what he was saying. "Not exactly," Conrad said, a masterful understatement in his tone. "The Beaumont Foundation, through its female entrepreneurship initiative, stepped in. We acquired the controlling interest at a fraction of its market value to save the company and its technology from being liquidated." He met her wide, questioning eyes. "The company, its groundbreaking patents, its entire future. It is now the cornerstone of the Jensen label's long-term production and sustainability plan. We finalized the transfer this morning. It's yours, Audrey." The air left her lungs. It was a move of such breathtaking, poetic justice that she couldn't immediately process it. He hadn't just given her funding. He had taken the very foundation of Jovan's ambition, the jewel in his corporate crown, and placed it directly into her hands. It wasn't just a gift. It was a transfer of power, absolute and undeniable. The empire Jovan had built by crushing others was now the bedrock of her own. Tears welled in her eyes, but they were not tears of sadness or pain. They were tears of overwhelming, cathartic release. Before she could find the words to thank him, a stage manager's sharp voice cut through the moment. "Jensen, you're on in 2 models to first positions." The house lights dimmed. A hush fell over the expectant crowd. A single haunting cello note filled the space, and the show began. The first model emerged from the darkness, walking the runway in a coat of severe, structured charcoal wool. Its lines were sharp, almost architectural, a beautiful cage. The audience, initially just politely observant, grew still. They recognized this was not just clothing. It was a statement. The collection unfolded as a narrative. The dark, restrictive pieces gave way to silhouettes in silver and cream fabrics that moved with a new liquid freedom. A collective intake of breath rippled through the room as a dress with a back of delicate, shattered beadwork, a clear echo of her ruined gala gown, now reclaimed as a thing of beauty, made its way down the runway. This was her story. The pain, the escape, the slow, deliberate rebuilding of a soul. The final pieces were a symphony of defiant, joyful color. The emerald green coat she had been fitting just weeks ago, a jumpsuit in a sapphire blue, so deep it felt like a midnight sky full of hope. And finally the showstopper, a breathtaking evening gown in a fiery, unapologetic crimson. It was the color of life, of passion of a heart that had been broken and had healed stronger than before. When the model in the crimson gown reached the end of the runway, the room, which had been held in a reverent silence, exploded. The applause was not polite. It was thunderous, a roar of genuine, visceral appreciation. As the models took their final walk, the host's voice boomed through the speakers. "And now, the visionary designer behind this incredible collection, please give a warm welcome to Audrey Jensen." Audrey stepped out from the wings into the blinding white light. The wave of applause was a physical force washing over her, and for a moment it was all she could do to just stand there and absorb it. She saw Conrad in the front row, beaming. She saw her sister Sophie, tears streaming down her face. She saw fashion critics nodding their faces alight with discovery. And then her eyes scanned the back of the room, and her blood ran cold. Standing near the bar, their forms stark and out of place, were Jovan and Bianca. They hadn't been invited, but their arrogance had surely gotten them past the velvet rope. Jovan looked like a ghost of the man he once was. His suit ill-fitting his face gaunt and etched with a profound bitterness. Bianca was at his side, her expression a mask of bored contempt, ready to witness the failure she had so eagerly anticipated. Her heart gave a painful, familiar lurch, but as she began her walk down the runway, taking in the thunderous ovation, a new strength settled over her. He had no power here. This was her space, her victory, her story. Just as she reached the end of the runway, Jovan made his move. He shoved his way through the crowd, ignoring the protests of those he pushed aside. The applause began to falter as a confused, uneasy murmur spread through the room. The music faded. The house lights came up slightly, casting a harsh glare over the scene. Jovan stopped directly below the stage, forcing everyone to look at him. "Bravo, Audrey," he called out, his voice a venomous sneer that cut through the silence. "A lovely little show. All bought and paid for by your rich new friend, I see. You were always good at finding a man to foot the bill, weren't you?" Bianca smirked from behind him, a silent, cruel endorsement of his attack. The old Audrey would have shattered, but the woman standing on the stage was forged in the fire of that very cruelty. She looked down at the man who had tried to erase her, and all she felt was a deep, weary pity. A stagehand, sensing the shift, rushed to her side with a microphone. She took it, her hand steady. "You're wrong, Jovan," she said, her voice calm and clear, amplified throughout the cavernous space. "This wasn't bought. This was earned." She let her gaze sweep across the captivated audience before returning to him. "It was earned in the quiet nights you thought I was just a sleeping accessory in your penthouse. It was earned with every dismissive comment you ever made, with every casual cruelty that chipped away at a woman you never bothered to know. You thought you were breaking me, Jovan, but you were just giving me material." She took a deep breath, feeling the power of her own truth. "But my ex-husband is right about one thing," she continued, her voice ringing with a newfound, unshakable confidence. "I did have help. I had the help of the Beaumont Foundation, an organization that believes in investing in women who have been told their dreams are nothing more than little hobbies. And tonight, my company, Jensen, is proud to formally announce our new exclusive partnership with the groundbreaking textile firm Innovatex to create a fully sustainable line of high-fashion clothing." A shocked gasp rippled through the financially savvy members of the crowd. They knew that name. Jovan's face, already pale, turned the color of ash. His jaw went slack. The public sneer dissolved into a mask of raw, naked shock. He understood. He had lost everything, and she, the woman he had discarded, had just been handed his legacy on a silver platter. Bianca's face went through a rapid series of calculations. The smug superiority vanished, replaced by the horrified realization that she was standing next to a man who was not only a social outcast, but a financial ghost. Her allegiance, always transactional, was now void. With a look of utter disgust, she took a deliberate step back from him, then another, before turning and disappearing into the stunned crowd without a single backward glance. Jovan was left alone, a pathetic, isolated figure stranded in the sea of silent onlookers. He stared up at Audrey, his mouth opening and closing like a fish, but no sound emerged. He had been rendered speechless, stripped of his power, his reputation, and his future in a single devastating moment. Audrey held his gaze for one final beat, not in triumph, but in closure. Then she turned her back on him and addressed the audience that was now beginning to applaud again, this time with even more fervor. "Thank you all so much for coming tonight," she said, and a brilliant, genuine smile, the first of its kind in years, lit up her entire face. "This is only the beginning." Audrey's story didn't end on that runway. It truly began. The Jensen label became a global phenomenon, celebrated not only for its stunning designs, but for its ethos of empowerment and resilience. She never saw Jovan again. He faded into obscurity, a cautionary tale whispered at cocktail parties about a man who had it all and threw it away because he failed to see the value in the person standing right next to him. Audrey found a new kind of love, not the whirlwind, possessive kind, but a quiet, steady partnership with a man who celebrated her strength instead of trying to extinguish it. Her story serves as a powerful reminder that sometimes our lowest moments are not an ending, but a tearing away of a life that was never meant for us, revealing the powerful, authentic person we were always meant to be. What did you think of Audrey's journey? If her story of resilience and ultimate triumph moved you, please show your support. Hit that like button. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it, and don't forget to subscribe for more tales of karma and empowerment. Your support helps us continue to bring these powerful stories to light. Thank you for listening.